Patty Soltis, CCXP, is a contributing author of the first edition of CXPA's Book of Knowledge, and specifically the section on culture and accountability. So, Patty, so glad you could make some time to join us today for CXPA Connections.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Gabe.
Excellent. So, Patty, would love to dive into the content that you and the team worked so hard on. You've had a chance to really live and breathe with this content and with these other folks who've written this content on culture and accountability. So, what is a passage that you feel is particularly compelling or representative? Tell me a little bit more about this content, how you've written it, how you've structured it, and perhaps a piece that you feel is really interesting.
So I'm going to set this up and just say that we divided this culture and accountability component into 4 different sections. So the 4 sections were leadership, improvement and maturity, employee activation, and measurement. And one of the common things that we had that went through the whole piece of it is change management. And it's interesting because any CX professional you speak with, whether a practitioner, a consultant, or an analyst, is going to tell you how important change management is. So we have that kind of just woven through each of the 4 sections that's here. In the leadership section, the team did an amazing job of talking about ADKAR, Cotter, and a few other change management modes. Then they continued it into improvement and maturity, giving some specific examples and some connections to journey mapping with it. Our employee activation group then did a third piece of this, and they really tied it into organizational design and framework. And then lastly, our measurement group took a look at this and said, okay, here's how you really need to see if you're succeeding or not succeeding inside of this, with dashboards and other different ways in which you could measure. So that change management piece was really important throughout this.
That's phenomenal, Patty. And so, would like to sort of dive in and put on my, CX practitioner hat here. I'm tasked with leading a CX culture change in my organization, or maybe it's continuing a culture change effort that has already begun. I'm tasked with delivering greater accountability in my organization. Perhaps that's, standing up a governance and sponsorship structure, or something else that's going to really help make CX sustainable and long-term effort in the organization. How should I look at this culture and accountability section? Is there a specific passage that you'd really recommend for somebody who maybe doesn't know where to start, that's particularly insightful? Is it something they should read the whole way through? Tell me more about kind of the nitty-gritty of this section.
Well, as a practitioner, I always recommend and think that you really have to look at this from a customization standpoint and getting to what is the root cause of what it is that you're trying to do, what's the problem you're trying to solve, and where is it that you're trying to go. And that's really kind of where you need to go from a starting point on this. Typically, the first starting point is recognizing how important culture and accountability is to an organization. And I would say that's the very first place to start. I was reading an HBR study recently, and they were talking about how there's a direct link between employee satisfaction and customer satisfaction, and then how that then leads to increased revenue, productivity, and profitability. So I would start there, and then looking once again, going back to those 4 sections, looking at leadership, looking at employee activation, looking at improvement and maturity and measurement, and take into consideration the CX maturity of the organization and where the organization sits with it. Now, most organizations sit on the low end of maturity and certainly need to move forward on that, but that's where you really have to go back once again to look at that. What is the root cause? What's the problem you're trying to solve, and where are you trying to go? Because you could really dig into all of these sections. And I think that the team that wrote this did just an incredible job of pulling together high level pieces of all of this.
Patty, that's excellent. I'd love to dive in a little bit to the book itself and see if you have a passage that comes to mind that you think is particularly interesting or compelling to somebody who's wanting to dive in to this particular section.
So I'm going to jump to the measurement section, because everybody always wants everything measured, and they all want to know, how do we know if this is successful? How do we know if it's not? All of those kinds of things. And a lot of times people are looking for an ROI and so on and so forth. So I'm going to jump into that part right there. And we actually, in the Book of Knowledge, talk about a dashboard and really creating one inside an organization. And there's a lot of different pieces that you can measure, everything from retention, turnover. You can measure what kind of referrals are you getting for new employees to come on board. You can look at productivity measures. I mean, there's all these pieces that you can look at and you can include inside of your dashboard. But once again, it goes back to what is the root cause that you're trying to do. The one caution that I always have when it comes to measurement is not getting caught up in the numbers, but in really looking at that quantitative feedback, get caught up in the qualitative feedback. Why is this number that number? And really digging into those pieces. And we talk about that inside the measurement section of really getting into that piece of it and understanding where the number came from and why it's there, because that's what you can impact.
That's phenomenal. That is on page 319 of CXPA's first edition of the CX Book of Knowledge, the section on culture accountability. Patty, thank you so much for joining us today. Patty Soltis, CCXP, contributing author to the culture and accountability section of the Book of Knowledge, as well as the patient experience consultant at Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa, Florida. Patty, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This is so fun.